I remember. I was very much looking forward to Final Fantasy XIV. Most of my old friends from Final Fantasy XI were hopping onto it, and I was looking forward to a new MMO, as nothing had really felt right since I had left Final Fantasy XI a few months prior. The RPC had started up and was bustling with enthusiasm, and both fresh faces and veterans from Final Fantasy XI were meeting up, and things were remarkably drama-free for role players. The system requirements were steep, so I had to invest in some upgrades for my computer, but hey, I was due for a good gaming system anyway, and it was for a good cause. I only got in on the open beta, which was short, like Phase 4, only about a week. I logged in and created my character. Coming from Final Fantasy XI, the character creator was tremendous. We're a bit jaded now, but coming from Final Fantasy XI's limited choices, it felt like I could finally make a character that didn't look like every other character out there. Turns out I made a character that looks like every other character out there, but that's more of a personal failing. Logging in, I took a bit. As with any other MMO launch, the game was plagued with login issues due to the rush and press of people eager to get in and see the new game. I had expected this. I had heard tales of Final Fantasy XI's launch woes, and so was actually looking forward to some tales of my own. And then I was in Limsa Lominsa. The first impressions of the place were, to put it mildly, epic. The city was huge and impressive, all bone-white spires and walkways and bloom every time you walk through a doorway. Visually speaking, the game was very impressive out of the gate. And unlike A Realm Reborn, you didn't start in your classy RSC all clean and neat. You started out as a refugee, in the hold of a ship, clad in filthy, stained rags, and clutching a rusty, beaten old weapon. You started as a nobody, and you looked the part. So I grabbed my disappointingly puny Gladius, and I headed out. Sure, I would graduate to something more impressive. And if it wasn't provided through quests, I would simply check the auction house. Right after I figured out how to sort my inventory and search for my friends in-game. Yeah. No problem, right? This is only beta, so I'm sure the stuff will show up. So off I went to do some guild leaves. Outside of the city, the world was huge, beautiful, and surprisingly empty. There were no ruins dotting the landscape, no farms or mills, a few lonely lighthouses on the cliffs devoid of life. Eventually I found a town, but they were empty and far removed from the little camps where we did our guild leaves. The rewards were surprisingly random. I would do a level 5 guild leave and get level 1 archer gear, or crafting gear, or just about anything but something useful. But it was alright. I was making gil, so I could just go to the NPC shop to buy what I couldn't scrounge from quests, right? After all, I had nearly 10,000 gil. So I hunted about, but there didn't seem to be any NPC selling anything but weathered gear for gladiators in Limsa. This is when I heard about the Gladiators Guild in Ul'dah. Maybe I started in the wrong city? So I took the ferry and prepared to make the jog to Ul'dah. And I got one-shotted by a level 35 antling who I never actually saw, but was apparently near the road. See, in those days, all mobs had ranged attacks, and antlings were sound aggro mobs who seemed to have an aggro radius greater than the draw distance in the beta. So, back to Limsa Lominsa I HP'd. So, maybe I could craft a sword? The first sword was a level 5 synth, but to make the materials was higher, so I settled down to do some leaves to level up so I could make the actual blade of the sword, which was a level 10 or so synth. It took a good 3 or 4 minutes to actually get the screen where I hit stuff with a hammer. Select craft from the menu, wait for the character to kneel and get out the tools, choose to open inventory, wait for a minute or two for that to open, painfully slowly scroll through the materials, select each individually, waiting each time for the game to catch up, then play a little minigame with a glowy ball and a bunch of commands, most of which didn't make much sense, and a bunch of stats that I didn't really know anything about. It took me about 15 minutes to make 1 bronze ingot. Okay, enough of that nonsense. I'll wait until launch to try again. Then we'd have auction houses, an inventory sort, and French search, so the lag will be fixed. So, launch day. Nothing changed. Absolutely zero. No auction houses, no inventory sort, no French search, huge menu lag, no NPC purchasable low-level gear, and a crafting system that required materials from a level 20 craft to make a level 5 sword. The combat and leveling system was weird. You had two separate levels. Your character level, which you retained regardless of which job you were on, and your job rank. The interplay between these was not well defined, but from what I could tell, your personnel level functionally meant jack shit. There was leveling itself. You got XP not from killing monsters, but from scoring hits with your weapon, or otherwise doing job actions the game considered useful in combat. The problem with this was that the balancing of it was terribly askew. Gladiators technically had two separate jobs they were ranking up, sword and shield, and you didn't get your first shield until rank 5. Pugilists easily outstripped marauders due to the fact that they attacked so quickly, and mages had a rough time getting enough points from healing or nuking. Thaumaturges and conjurers were not well differentiated until higher levels. At low to mid levels, they were more or less identical. They both healed, they could both AoE heal, they could both raise, and they could both nuke. Conjurers had all the elemental nukes, and Thaumaturges had dark and light dot nukes. Then Thaumaturges got Shadow Seer, and basically your main choices were to get a Thaumaturge, or to choose wrong and eventually kick the Conjurer and get a Thaumaturge. And it was still impossible to get proper gear. The skill level to craft a rank 29 sword was actually fairly reasonable, but the skill required to craft the lower level swords was actually higher. In other words, while making an Iron Falchion was fairly simple, making an Iron Gladius was damn near impossible. So everyone was running around in an eclectic mix of mismatched gear, either far too low level or far too high level for them. Because Final Fantasy XIV didn't forbid you from wearing gear based on its level in those days, a rank 1 mage character could equip rank 50 heavy plate if he wanted to. Naturally, there were heavy stat penalties for equipping gear too far outside of your level range. However, getting gear in the proper range was almost impossible thanks to the Market Ward system. The Market Wards were large, visually identical hallways where you could dump your retainer to stand around with other retainers, shuffling their feet and looking supremely awkward with a bazaar flag over their heads. There was no indication of what they were selling, or an indication of which ward was for what, so finding what you were looking for in the wards was actually more time-consuming than just going out and farming or gathering it yourself. You only had 7 or 8 slots to sell items in as well, so you couldn't even sell a category of items effectively. You could also request items, which had a unique icon, and it might have actually saved the system by providing a method of commissioning gear and such, except to request something, you had to already have it. And the item was then tied up until you canceled the request, so it was utterly pointless. Later they added categories to the generic wards and a search function, but all the retrofits never quite brought it up to the functionality that the simple market boards have in A Realm Reborn, or the auction house in Final Fantasy XI. Another problem with 1.0 was that the zones, while huge and lacking hard zone lines, though there were soft ones, as you sometimes would discover during guild leaves, especially around Halatali, was that they were empty and boring. They looked exactly the same no matter what part of them you were in, and they were completely devoid of structures or variants. Another big issue was the gear, or more specifically how drab it all was. You started out in stained, dirty, brown clothes, and basically got new, cleaner brown clothes. So you had your starter brown gear, your brown gear, your gray and beige gear, and brown weapons, your gray, gray and brown, brown and beige, gray and brown. Now we've upgraded to brown armor. Brown, 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 brown. And of course the best gear at that time in the game, for rank 50 only, rust. And the repair system was, well, punitive. Even when the gear was optimally matched with your level, it had the durability of congealed butter. A sword would typically last for 3 guild leaves before it would break, and gear was considered broken at 50% durability. NPCs would only repair gear to 75% durability, and the scaling of how they charged was so messed up that it was literally cheaper to replace that rank 29 Iron Falchion than it was to repair it at the NPC. So, why did I stick with it? A lot of people didn't, and rightly so. The game was practically unplayable at launch, and remained broken, clumsy mess for a good year afterwards. Simply put, It was the people, the role players. The game was a mess, but the people made it worthwhile. We banded together, crafted together, leveled together, helped each other out, and generally turned what was a bad game into a great experience. These are the people who stuck out with the game and became legacy. I've seen them around in the beta online. So if any of you are apprehensive about legacy players, I can tell you, for me, they made a terrible game great. And I can't wait to see what they do with a great game.